Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State University. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a lawyer, CEO of 2 nonprofit organizations, and as a state legislator, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. And the lessons I've learned come down to just 2 words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice, and they are living leadership. Last week we heard from Richard Cordray, the former Attorney General of Ohio. We heard about his legal career in particular. This week we're going to hear more about his public career, and particularly his position as director of the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the first ever director appointed by President Obama, and his new position as the guru for federal financial aid for the United States, recently appointed by President Joe Biden. So stay tuned. You won't want to miss this interview. One of the greatest achievements of President Barack Obama was the creation of the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the person he appointed as the first ever director was you. And it was, you did a phenomenal job that ended up in a book. So let's spend the next 5-10 minutes talking about that job, what it was like. And let's tell us a little bit about the book as well, called Watchdog.
Well, I'll start with the process of him appointing me. There was a law professor named Elizabeth Warren, which is now a better known name than it was, who had really had the idea for a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She'd written an article that was the germ out of which the thing grew. And he had appointed her to be the person to set up the Bureau. It got passed into law with a 1-year kind of grace period where it's supposed to build up, and then it could start to exercise its authorities after a year. And during that year, she was involved as basically the director, setting the place up. She's the one that brought me in. I had lost my attorney general race in 2010, and she called me and said, you know, she didn't mean to be jubilant at my expense, but maybe this meant that I would be freed up and I would think about coming to work at the Consumer Bureau and be tough on the banks and the payday lenders and others. And it was kind of an offer I couldn't refuse. Her enthusiasm was irresistible. But then after 6 months, it was determined, rightly or wrongly, by the administration that she would not be able to be confirmed by the Senate for the position. And so they had to look for someone else, and she recommended to Barack Obama that he pick me for the position. And I remember going to the White House for an interview with him, and, you know, being nervous as you would be, although if he was having me interview, it seemed like that was at least, you know,
A good sign.
A good sign, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being there at the White House waiting for the interview, and him coming out and saying to a couple people who were nearby, "Yeah, I know Rich. I remember him from the campaign trail in Ohio." And then he had me in and basically explained to me why this was a really important job and I had to do it. And he said to me that there were 2 things that he thought that he was going to be remembered for, and this was only a couple years into his administration, so you know, it wasn't clear that what the trajectory would be yet. But one would be healthcare reform, and the other would be the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to look out for people in their daily financial lives, where so many of them end up in bad situations and deserve some protection and also some clearer sense of what choices they're making. And, you know, it was very persuasive to me. I mean, I wasn't going to say no to him. I mean, I thought that I might have trouble getting confirmed if Elizabeth would, that I would too, for various political reasons. But he wanted to go ahead, so I did. And it actually took 2 years to get me confirmed. I got held up by the Senate for 2 years. He ended up appointing me into the position after 6 months because they had blocked me. He made what was called a recess appointment, a rare thing, and I could then serve for a year and a half. And during that time, we'd made enough progress on some of our issues, including mortgage reform that there were a number of Republicans who ended up voting for me as they yielded on this, and I was confirmed fairly easily in the end.
Well, tell us about your experience there, because you ended up writing a book about it. So give us the summary version of Watchdog and your experience as director.
So Watchdog is a book with the subtitle of How Protecting Consumers Can Save Our Families, Our Economy, and Our Democracy. And I really do believe that people having a sense that their financial lives aren't rigged against them, and that there's fairness and they're going to be treated fairly and with respect, it just matters enormously to people as a psychological matter, let alone the financial effects it can have on them. You can make one really bad decision, say about a mortgage, where you end up having to go into foreclosure and you can ruin your credit and really set your life back for years and years to come. Or you build up student loans and then you're not able to graduate, or you end up in one of certain schools that are disreputable and you don't even know it. You know, there's so many ways that you can be tripped up, and to try to smooth those problems out and make the way forward clear, and, you know, push hard on the big banks and institutions that have a lot of power in our society to make sure that they treat people fairly, and they understand that if they don't, somebody's going to be not only watching them but taking action, mattered enormously. And I think it straightened up a lot of behavior in the marketplace that benefited Americans. And I was really proud of that work. And we had, I talked earlier about having a great team. We had a tremendous team in Washington, D.C., because so many people were interested in coming to a brand new government agency with this sort of idealistic mission of protecting consumers. And for them, it meant, you know, problems they'd seen with their mother and father, or with their sister and brother, or, you know, friends. And they wanted to do something about it. This was right in the wake of the financial crisis, where so many people had their financial lives damaged. And so it was a wonderful time where so many people were interested in making progress. And we had the best of the best doing that work with us. And we accomplished a lot. And by the way, under the Biden administration, the new nominee who's going to be in that position is named Rohit Chopra. He was at the CFPB with me. He headed all of our federal student loan work. So now, ironically, he will be head of the Consumer Bureau, and I'm now over at Federal Student Aid.
It is ironic.
Where we will work together on these issues just as we did before. And I'm very excited about that. I think we can make a tremendous amount of progress.
During the Trump years, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau took a different turn. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it started, I was right in the middle of it to begin with, because Donald Trump was elected president in November of 2016. I was in the middle, not in the middle, I was well along, but I had a 5-year term that I served. And as soon as he was elected, there was a hue and cry from certain Republicans and opponents of the agency, maybe some of the financial institutions themselves stirring it up, to have him fire me from that job. And I actually had to take steps to put myself in a position to bring a legal challenge if I were fired. It was unclear what would happen for the 2 months of the transition. Then he came into office, and ultimately I sat down with Gary Cohn, who was his economic advisor at the time, and we worked it out. I was going to continue doing my job, and I would keep them posted on what we were doing, but, you know, I wasn't leaving, and we weren't going to back off of doing anything we were doing. And they were not comfortable with that. They were uneasy about that, but we reached a kind of understanding, and I went forward with some aggressive measures, the last of which was to put in place new rules governing payday lending and trying to rein in some of the abuses of that. At that point, I then resigned from the office. This is November of 2017. So I stayed almost a year under Donald Trump. And at that point, I was replaced. My successor was Mick Mulvaney, who had been one of our real foes in the Congress. He had been a congressman from South Carolina, and he used to pester us quite a bit and criticize us and so on. And now suddenly he was the head of the Bureau, which was really difficult for the people there. But they're professional, they're dedicated. He was not really able to destroy the Bureau. He made some efforts along those lines or cripple it. I think ultimately was maybe a little frustrated by that. But by the end of his time there, which was about a year, he said publicly, "This is an agency that's here to stay. It's not going anywhere, and we should see what can be done with it." So he had sort of changed his tune quite a bit. He was then succeeded by a new director named Kathy Kraninger, who served for the rest of the Trump administration. And she was, from my standpoint, she was a mixed bag in some ways. She was not anti-consumer. She worked for consumers in various respects. She carried on some of the policies Mick Mulvaney had put in place and that I disagreed with. And so I criticized her when I thought appropriate, but I commended her when I thought appropriate as well. When President Biden was elected, it had become clear there was a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, all these harmonic conversions, about this Consumer Bureau's director's tenure, and it was decided that the Consumer Bureau director did not have a term of years, but could be ousted by the president at any time. That had finally been resolved, and President Biden asked for her resignation, and she provided it, and now we'll have a new director of that agency, and I think we will have some good years ahead.
That's great. So when you left that position, you decided to run for governor of Ohio. And you and I, as I indicated at the beginning of this interview, have something in common. We both ran for governor of Ohio. We both lost. But most people don't know what it's like to run for statewide office.
Let's do a little better. Let's do a little better than that. We both for governor, we both won the nomination of our party and then lost.
I like to say that. In fact, it's funny you should say that, Rich, because when people ask me my wins and losses, I always include the primaries because it sounds more impressive.
And they're legitimate, hard-fought wins.
So I ran 16 times and won 13 out of 16. Just so happens that the 3 I lost were big general elections, but it sounds much better that way. So you're right.
Darn good record.
That's right. So it's better to say that you won the primaries. You're right about that. So let's talk about that race for governor. You actually entered at a time when there were a lot of very, very strong, formidable candidates thinking of running. And in a sense, you cleared the field. But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I didn't clear the field in the sense that everybody didn't get out just because I was in. There were a few who withdrew, and a couple of them are candidates now, and very good candidates if you ask me. Mm-hmm. But I still ended up in a 4-way primary that year and had to fight to win it. And of course, that takes its toll, and you spend money, and it's somewhat distracting. On the other hand, you energize your supporters and get your name out. So, it's unclear what the pros and cons are. But, I had a 4-way primary with Dennis Kucinich being the most formidable of the opponents, and I believe is possibly running for mayor of Cleveland now. In the months ahead, we will see. I had respect for all the people running. I thought I was the best candidate. That's why you run. And I thought it would make a difference what we could do in that office. And then Mike DeWine, who had defeated me for Attorney General in 2010, and I knew was a formidable politician and office holder, was my opponent in the fall. And we came close, but we didn't quite get over the hump. And he is an impressive campaigner, and of course has been the governor now during the pandemic when we've had some very hard things to face, and I think he's faced them pretty well.
If you could turn the clock back and look at your political career, are there any things you might have done differently in any of your campaigns that you weren't successful at? That in the years gone by, you say, okay, I wish I had done this and not that? Or do you decide, not worth looking back, I'm just going to look forward?
Well, how long do you have here?
We can make this an hour and a half if you'd like.
Yeah. No, look, there's always things, if you're reflective, you're going to find things that you wish you'd done differently, or wonder if, had you done them differently, would there be anything? And, the reality is you usually don't really know. You kind of end up still wondering. But I don't spend a lot of time post-morteming these things. You do the very best you can at the time. You try to know as much as you can about making good decisions about what's the best way to to start the course, and then you do it. And then, when it's over, rather than kick yourself and spend a lot of energy, it's not productive, move on and try to find something else worthwhile to do. And here I find that I'm going to be fortunate enough to have a chance to do that. And for me, initially it was writing the book, Watchdog, which took about a year, and was good self-reflection, time well spent.
That's a great way to deal with defeat, because it's a hard thing to do. I know when our students, some of our students don't pass the bar exam, I send them a letter and I talk about all my defeats in public office.
What a kind thing to do. That's a tough thing for a young person. And many of them take it again and pass it in
right.
the third, or some of them fourth or fifth try. That people are very persistent. But to get that I'm sure that means a lot to them.
Well, I just tell them that although I don't know exactly what it's like, that I do know what it's like to lose. And I said to them, the difference is, of course, I lost in front of 11 million people. And so that is a little different. 11 people know you failed your exam. And I say to them but you can rebound. And I think you're a good example of that you can rebound and find another chapter in your life. And I think it's a very important lesson for everyone to learn. Whether you have a public failure or a private failure, most of us have to go through at least one of them, if not more, during our lives.
Well, and you used to articulate that so eloquently, and I don't know that I have the exact same words that you used, but you used to talk about it's not how hard you fall, but it's how high you can bounce.
Yes.
That is, we all have stumbles, and we all end up with setbacks. You can let those define you, or you can do your best to shrug them off and use them as fuel and impetus to go on and try to do something more or something better. And if you can do that, that's really one of the secrets of life, and not only makes you successful, but I think makes you a really strong person in personal and professional life. And that was I used to love the way you used to say that, and I've heard you say it so many times because we spent so much time campaigning together, it's very true.
It is. Well, let's talk a little bit about your current position. You haven't been in it long, so I realize that some of this may be talking about how you envision the future as opposed to what you've already done. But you have one of the most important positions in the Biden administration. It's one that many people may not know about, but when they learn about it, they recognize how significant it is. You're the Chief Operating Officer of Federal Student Aid in the U.S. Department of Education. So explain to me what your responsibilities are.
Sure, and I haven't been in the job long, as you say, so I don't really have accomplishments I would point to, but I have many accomplishments I would hope to make progress on or complete to the extent I can. So federal student aid is as it sounds. I mean, some of these jobs, it's hard to interpret even what the job is about, but this is all about the kind of financial assistance that the government now provides. And it used to be that banks provided it and they were in the middle of it, but more and more it's now direct student loans to help people all over the country pursue higher education. And that can be college or university. It can be community college. It can be apprentice programs. It can be graduate school. The whole range of it. Almost always you're going to have a considerable number of students. Well, always you're going to have a considerable number of students who need financial help. They don't just have some bank account laying around, or their parents don't, where they can just draw from it, whatever is needed to finance their education. And by the way, back when you and I went to school, it was still possible for a lot of people. I had friends who worked their way through school, and they could work at a job and go to school at the same time, which is a heavy load, but they could finance a lot of their school through their own efforts. And nowadays, that's really, virtually impossible to do. And people end up taking out loans and then having to repay them over a considerable amount of time. So this job deals with all of the provision of that financial aid across the country, and dealing with the eligibility and the programming characteristics of it, working with the colleges and universities and community colleges on those issues. We're at a moment where this job really is quite significant because there's so many big issues pending here. Number one, we have the issue of whether there's going to be any kind of student loan forgiveness for people who have accumulated this debt, which now is about $1.6, $1.7 trillion. And that's an issue that's going to be a big decision to be made sometime this year. There are other programs that would help people have their loans forgiven. There's public service student loan forgiveness, which is actually the law of the land, has been for more than 10 years, but very few people have gotten the benefit of it because of administrative snafus, and that's a gentle word, but, administrative screw-ups that have made it hard for people to get the benefit of what the law is supposed to provide them. Where I'm going to be determined to straighten that out. There's also right now, during the pandemic, there has been a pause on student loan repayment. It goes back to the Trump administration, actually, and the Biden administration has extended it. At some point, we're going to have to restart student loan repayment, and that's a difficult administrative moment, a little bit like the healthcare.gov problems we had. Goes smoothly, that'll be a success, but if not, a lot of people will feel it, and there'll be a lot of angst around that. So that's going to be on my watch. And then there's a variety of other issues about how you apply for aid and how we can simplify that, and other things.
How many people report to you in this position?
Right now it's about 1,450. That's a little
really
had been, but yeah, it's interesting. The Department of Education at the federal level has about 3,600 people, I believe, and this part of it is the bulk of the people who deal with higher education. There are some other people in the department who deal with higher education. There's an undersecretary for higher education, but there's so much operational element to higher education, and that's what's under my purview.
That's pretty impressive, and it's why it's such an important position and why I think people will be hearing more about it. As we conclude our interview today, I want to get a little bit more philosophical and talk about what you think the future of politics is in our country, the future of the Democratic Party, the future of the Republican Party. Given the divisiveness that we've seen, particularly over the last 4 years, it's hard to be an optimist. But I want to get your thoughts on the political divisiveness we see in our country today at all levels, but particularly the federal level.
Well, there has been a significant amount of divisiveness. There's no question about that. I mean, to the point where a new president comes in and it's not a natural instinct for the other party to help or cooperate with them on things. There used to be a saying that politics ends at the water's edge, meaning that foreign policy was a nonpartisan issue and Americans work together of both parties to put ourselves in the right position around the world. I don't think you can say that that's true today. And I think on domestic policy, the divides are sharp. Very early on in the Obama administration, Senator McConnell made it clear, drawing a line, there was going to be no cooperation, and we would see what happened. And I think that, there's kind of an escalating dynamic around that. But let's put it in perspective. And I think that's difficult and that concerns me. And if there's anybody who can do something about that, it's President Joe Biden, who has worked across the aisle his whole life. And we'll see if he's able to do it or not. It's not clear to me he'll succeed, but it is pretty clear to me that if he can't succeed, then it's going to be very difficult to find someone who can, unless or until we get into some kind of crisis where people are willing to put some of that aside. But again, in context, it's not like we're living at a time like 1861 when the country fell into a civil war and we had armies on both sides killing each other by the thousands, and, really fighting for their survival and for who was going to be, have the supremacy. I mean, we're nothing like that. I mean, we're a tamer society now and hopefully forever will be. And we're in a great position around the world where we carry so much clout and have so much authority that it's a good for that. But shame on us if we can't use this time to head on some of these problems that aren't Republican or Democrat. How to finance higher education for your children in an era when higher education is becoming more and more important to guiding their future path. That Republican families grapple with that. Democratic families grapple with that. Non-political families grapple with that. And that's something that we can and should make real progress on. And, bad for our country if partisanship interferes on issues like that or issues like healthcare or issues like, dealing with the environment and climate change, all the challenges that face us. And they're significant challenges. And if we don't have our full weight pulling in the right direction on them, we won't do as well with them, and the country won't flourish as it should. And that's on us if that's the case.
Rich, some of the people who watch and listen to this podcast are law students, some are lawyers, some are in government, some are in all other different professions. But I'm going to ask you my final three questions, which are sort of lessons learned. And here are my three questions. I'll ask them all at once. One is, you're a law student, comes up to you and says, if you could do law school all over again, what would you wish you had known as a first-year law student? Second, a lawyer comes up to you and says, what do you wish you had known at the beginning of your legal career? And third, somebody comes up to you and says, what do you wish you had known at the beginning of your political career that you know now? So what's your advice to a law student? What's your advice to a young lawyer? And what's your advice to somebody who's interested in running for political office? You can take any one in any order you'd like.
So that's a serious set of questions. And
yes, they are.
If I sat and thought about it for a week, I might end up with different things to say.
That's fair. That's fair.
Saying off the cuff, but I'll just say, so to a first-year law student, I would say, sample widely. There's a lot of classes you can take. Try to get a sense of a variety of different subjects. You can't in law school take all the subjects that you're going to, deal with on the bar exam or deal with in practice, perhaps. So really get a wide sense of what might interest you. That's what one piece of advice. There's probably a number of pieces of advice I give, but that's one. To somebody starting out as a lawyer, I guess it's again some of the same thing. Relax a little bit. This is not life or death in terms of what you're doing for the next year or two. You can change course. You can move into different directions. You can find what interests you. There's many ways to make a difference as a lawyer in our communities, and feel your way, because law practice is very different from law school. And just because you mastered certain elements of law school, you're going to have to deal with different things in law practice, and you'll have to get used to that and grow into it. So that's what patience, I guess I would say. And for somebody in a political life, I would say, and I think you and I epitomize this, there are going to be successes. There are going to be setbacks, and you don't know from one year to the next which they're going to be. And sometimes you can look back and think, well, that was maybe my fault, or I could have done this differently. And sometimes you look back and you think, I don't know what I could have done that would have been different, timing and other things. And there's often a big, current that flows, and we're just small pieces in that current.
Yes.
I would say that you have to be somewhat philosophical in a political. It doesn't mean you don't fight just as hard as you can when you're trying to, win political office, which is always a tough contest, or B, in office to fight to get things done that you think are going to matter to people, and see what you can do to better the society. But don't beat yourself up if things don't always go your way, and don't give up because things haven't always gone your way, because, tomorrow's another day, and, don't take it personally. And look for your opportunities and be persistent.
We always have to remember that we have different chapters in our lives, and you're a great example of that. You've won and you lost, but you keep moving on. And I think it'd be fair to say you keep moving up. And the position you have today is one of the most responsible in all of federal government. And I'm impressed that President Biden has seen that, just as President Obama saw that with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and just as Lee Fisher saw it years ago when he was Attorney General and asked you to be Solicitor General. So I want to thank you. You've had an outstanding legal career, an outstanding government career, and there's much more to come. I think that your position right now with the Biden administration is not the final chapter. You're going to have many more chapters. And I look forward maybe to having another interview when you begin that next chapter, whatever it is and whenever it is. So thank you, Richard Cordray. You've been a phenomenal guest. And this will be such a long interview. It's been divided into two different segments. So we thank you for taking the time, and say hello to Peggy.
Thank you. And I'm available to you, just to be clear, anytime.
Appreciate it very much. Thanks again to Richard Cordray, our special guest. See you later.